Omagyanatimirandasya gyananjana shalakaya chakshurmilitanjena tasmai shri gurave namaha. Dandavat pranams to all of our assembled Vaishnavas from around the world. So today is the Divine Appearance Day, Śrīla Bhakti Rakṣak Śrīdhar Dev-Goswāmī Mahārāj. And we're here in Japan, and I think most of you know, well, some of you are in USA, others are in different parts of Europe. Our Gurudev Śrīla Govinda Mahārāj, he liked to say that the sun never sets on Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat, and because whenever we're celebrating a festival in one country, the time is moving, right, in a cyclic way. So non-stop across the world at different phases of the sun, right? This festival day is being celebrated, right? So all across the world. So I feel our Gurudev would be so happy to see this, right? On every continent, and all over, everyone is remembering the glories of Śrīla Bhakti Rakṣak, Śrīdhar Dev-Goswāmī Mahārāj. And this morning we had a program with our group here, and we were reading through, it's in one of our books, Centenary Anthology. Some of you will know that book. And there's a section there where there was an interview with Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj where he's talking about his life and his early years, and it was so inspiring to hear that. There's one song in glorification of Śrīla Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur where there's one line which Gurudev liked very much, Vaishnaveda Gunagan Kodile Jiveda Tran. It begins like that, saying that by hearing the glories of the great souls, we can cross over the whole ocean of material existence, right? Because when we hear about their lives, how they have lived their lives of dedication in different ways, in surrender, right? Because it's one thing to hear about surrender, but it is another to hear about how that was expressed in the lives of the great souls, how they express their surrender and actively and dynamically in this world, right? And so it makes it all more tangible for us, right? To hear how they have offered their lives in surrender to the Lord. And so it gives us some inspiration, right? To try to give ourselves according to our own capacity in our own small way, right? To try to give ourselves. And so where do we start, right? When it comes to the glories of our Param Gurudev. And we can also say, right, that, this was to remember the glories of Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj. This was one of the primary purposes of our Gurudev establishing missions all over the world, right? Because Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj's nature was very reserved, right? And he was not interested in making a big mission. He really was not, He wanted rather, Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj's tendency was to have something small and authentic, right? Something concentrated and pure and focused, right? He didn't, because when things become very big, inevitably they become diluted, right? And polluted in different ways. And so Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj's tendency was to have a small, focused, authentic group. He was concerned about things becoming too big, And he specifically told that to Śrīla Govinda Mahārāj, don't make too many temples, And we hear that once our Gurudev, he was commenting on this and saying, so then why have I opened so many temples, right? Guru Mahārāj told me not to. And he said, because in each of those temples, the glories of Śrīla Guru Mahārāj will be told, right? That the glories of Guru Mahārāj, they will spread all over the world. And so it's really a privilege for us, right? That by the grace of Śrīla Govinda Mahārāj, we can all know something about who is Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj. And in doing so, in learning something of the glories of Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj, we're fulfilling something of the real purpose of this mission, Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat, right? If we really want to consider ourselves genuine, aspiring members of this glorious mission, then we must know about the founder of this mission, right? We don't just want to join this community as like a kind of social circle, right? There are all kinds of social groups. If we just need, social support or emotional support, there are all kinds of groups, right? And nowadays online, there's so many different groups we can join, right? But this is something more than that. It's not just a social group, right? But there's a particular ideal upon which this group has been founded, this mission has been founded. And so for us to really consider ourselves authentic, aspiring members, then we need to know something about what was the original intent of the founder of this mission, right? And Srila Śrīdhar Mahārāj, his position is very unique, right? And preeminent, we can say, within the group of the disciples of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. I mean, sometimes I think, like, in how many ages of time, right? And that means in how many millions of years, really, like, do we have the privilege of hearing the kind of Harikatha that has come from Srila Bhakti Rakṣak Śrīdhar Dev-Goswāmī Mahārāj? Like, it's not something that we can take for granted, The level of the profundity of his presentation of what is Krishna consciousness at the deepest level, that has been given in a unique way. Like, he is not surpassed by anyone, we can say. And this is something that is celebrated and acknowledged by Vaishnavas from many missions, right? And it is not only our mission of Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Math, but so many, Gaudiya missions, all of the missions that are associated with Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they are honoring what is the unique position of Srila Śrīdhar Mahārāj. And this is valuable for us to remember, to consider, because our capacity to appreciate is very limited, right? What reference point do we have? We don't have any reference point. What is great? What is small? What is high? What is low? We don't know, right? We're just like ignorant children. We don't know anything. But when we hear about the great Vaishnavas, like what was their appreciation for Srila Śrīdhar Mahārāj, then we can get some idea, right? We get some reference point. And so if we think about, for example, Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada, right? It is, as our Gurudev said, it is easy to appreciate how great is Srila Prabhupada, right? He established this worldwide mission of Krishna consciousness. And if we consider, what was the type of appreciation he had for Srila Śrīdhar Mahārāj, right? He referred to Srila Śrīdhar Mahārāj as his Shiksha Guru. He wanted to make him the president of his organization, right? Wanted to offer him a place in Mayapur, wanted him to be the president of his mission, came to Srila Śrīdhar Mahārāj for guidance, advice, right? Then we can get some idea who is Srila Śrīdhar Mahārāj, right? And so many of Srila Śrīdhar Mahārāj's exalted godbrothers, right? Because Saraswati Thakur, he had not one or two, but he had many highly qualified disciples, right? After Saraswati Thakur left the world, they all went on to start their own missions, many of them. One of them I just learned recently, it was Madhav Maharaj, Bhakti-Jita Madhav Maharaj. He actually established more temples than Saraswati Thakur. Saraswati Thakur established 64 missions throughout India. And Madhav Maharaj, it was more than that. Was it 67 or 70 something? I just learned from Devashish Prabhu, even more. These are great, powerful, qualified preachers with potency, highly qualified. And they universally, they all appreciated, they all put Srila Śrīdhar Mahārāj in this position of preeminence, right? And there was one of those godbrothers, Bhakti Saranga Goswami Mahārāj, there was one meeting, there was a meeting they would have every year after Gaur Purnima at our mat, Sri Chaitanya Saraswati mat. Vishwa Vaishnava Raja Sabha. It was something established by Jiva Goswami, where leading Vaishnavas would come together and share some news of their preaching activity, their service life, consult with one another, and so on. And at that time, of our mat. It was held in our mat in that era. And so all of these great sannyasis would come from their respective missions and meet in our temple. And Śrīla Śrīdhar Maharaj, he would give Goswami Maharaj the seat of honor, because Goswami Maharaj, he was someone of, high prominence. And there was one meeting in particular that they had, and at one point in the meeting, Goswami Maharaj, he was glorifying Śrīla Śrīdhar Maharaj, and he used this one expression, Simhavalokan, which means the glance of a lion. Oh, are we recording? I can't remember. Yeah, we're recording. Yeah, okay. I forgot. Simhavalokan, it means the glance of a lion. And he was, very nice analogy. He said, on the plains, the lions are very powerful preachers, right? They're striding forward with great power and confidence, but lions are also careful and wise, and every now and again when they're walking along, they'll throw a glance behind to check, like survey the terrain, make sure they're on the right track, and so on. And then they take that pause, and then they continue. And so Bhakti Sranga Goswami Maharaj, he said, we are like these lion preachers, right? Powerful preachers. Actually, Śrīla Śrīdhar Maharaj's mission was poor and small, right? But many of his godbrothers, they were these powerful preachers, right? Who collected so many people and members of their ashrams, established so many temples. But Śrīla Śrīdhar Maharaj, his temple was very small, and he didn't have that tendency, right, to go out and preach in a big way. And he was also very strict, right? And it was hard for anyone to stay in his bar, very strict. But anyway, so Goswami Maharaj, he used this nice analogy saying, we are all like these lion preachers going out and preaching widely and establishing our missions. And he said, but every now and again, we are taking a pause and looking to Śrīla Śrīdhar Maharaj, right? And seeing, is he pleased with us, right? Is he happy with us? And then we are continuing with our preaching, right? So this was the type of position that Śrīla Śrīdhar Maharaj had amongst his godbrothers, who were themselves so highly qualified, right? And we hear of one occasion when because after the departure of Saraswati Thakur, there were inevitably, right, there were divisions that sprung up between different groups, and Śrīla Śrīdhar Maharaj, he's very non-political, but because of a friendship he had with one prominent Vaishnava, he became associated with this one group, and then that meant that members of another group thought he's not part of us, and all these things, right? But there was one, he was the principal secretary of one supposedly opposing group. He would, when Śrīla Śrīdhar Maharaj was in Calcutta, this Vaishnava from this other group, he would come and hear from Śrīla Śrīdhar Maharaj. And Śrīla Śrīdhar Maharaj himself was surprised, like, even you're coming to meet with me, and I didn't expect this, and that Vaishnava, he made this expression, because of your deep intelligence, your strong common sense, and your disinterested nature. He mentioned these three qualities. Disinterested meaning like neutral nature, not motivated by any type of prejudice, right? And so he glorified Śrīla Śrīdhar Maharaj like this. He also wanted to hear from Śrīla Śrīdhar Maharaj. So this is the position of Śrīla Śrīdhar Maharaj. And as I mentioned earlier, right, we this morning here with our group, we were hearing from this autobiographical account from Śrīla Śrīdhar Maharaj about his early life, and he came from a very high Brahmin family, because there are actually different levels of Brahmins in India, and Śrīla Śrīdhar Maharaj came from, if not the highest, one of the highest, Bhattacharya Brahmins, I think they're called. I'm not sure. Grew up speaking Sanskrit in his household, was composing Sanskrit shlokas before 15 years old, quite extraordinary. And we hear how of this one incident, very wonderful incident, when he was at college, he was at university, and um, and he was out having a morning stroll in the traditional Indian style, cleaning their teeth with some tree twigs, and just chatting, and his friends, Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj's friend, he referred to his father, but he referred to him as that gentleman, like someone very distant from him. And especially in the Indian culture, this is quite shocking. And Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj objected, oh, how can you talk about your father like that gentleman? And his friend said, well, maybe it was a little offensive for me to say that, but it is the truth, right? In this life, we have these parents, but in a previous life, we have other parents. In our next life, it will be different parents altogether. Really, like, what is our actual relationship? This is a temporary relationship, you know? And Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj said that this hit him in a very heavy way, and it like put him into this deep state of inner searching and inquiry. What is he was like looking around and feeling like what is, I don't have anything actually. I have no real stable position in my life. Like, what is actually real and meaningful? What stability do I have? And so he was like thrust into this mood of deep inquiry and feeling lost. What's real, what's genuine, what's a real stable position to have. We're just lost in eternity. There was this one really nice expression, we're just wandering, lost in eternity, something like that. And then sometime after that, someone gave him a book about the life and the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he said he devoured it like nectar, and felt like, oh, now I find some purpose, now I find some meaning, right? This is giving me the way forward, why I'm really here, what's the real purpose of my life, what is my real ideal in life, all these things. But he also felt, but I need a guru, right? It is, I understand what the prema dharma, right? This movement of divine love given by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, by Srimad Bhagavatam. This is the highest gift for all of humankind. But I need a point of connection, right? I need a guru. And so it was some years he was searching, right? And in the meantime, life's happening, he ended up getting married by the request of his father. He completed his education at university. He put in time in the non-cooperation movement with Gandhi. Because, remember also, we forget sometimes in the background of the, of Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj's youth, and then also the early days of the Gaudiya Math, right? Saraswati Thakur was preaching at a very difficult time in India, this time of there was this rising resistance against the British, and so many Indians are absorbed in this quest for independence from the British, right? Then there's also tensions between the Hindus and the Muslims. It was a difficult time. It was a turbulent time to try and preach about God, right? And God consciousness. Not everybody was interested. Swami Maharaj Prabhupada himself, right? We hear how in the beginning, one of his friends like kind of pulled him along to meet Saraswati Thakur, and Swami Maharaj Prabhupada himself was like, how is this relevant right now? First, we need independence from the British, right? But when he met Saraswati Thakur, he, changed his mind on that point, and he was made to feel this is something more urgent, actually. This, understanding of our eternal need, right? This is the real urgent thing. We're all sleeping in ignorance, under illusion. This is the real urgent problem, right? But so anyhow, Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj is also, got caught up with this. He's pulled into this movement, Gandhi's movement, for some time. And then he came across the members of the Gaudiya Math, right? And Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj gives a beautiful description of how there was a sign that he came across advertising the Gaudiya Math, and his curiosity was piqued, and he came to one of the Gaudiya Maths. Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, he always had a very inquiring nature, right? And he mentioned how he was a very sharp listener, and he would read with very deep attention and catch in a very comprehensive way, in a very fine way, whatever he read, whatever he heard. And so he came to the Mat, one of the Gaudiya Mats, and at that time, Saraswati Thakur was out. They were on Harinam, Nagar, Sankirtan in the streets of Calcutta. And so there was one devotee waiting outside, and Srila Śrīdhar was inquiring from him. And he was impressed, by his knowledge, by his mood. And so he stood and waited, and so he was there when Saraswati Thakur arrived with the front, looking very majestic with his danda. And Srila Śrīdhar was immediately impressed by him. And he said he had this air of deep indifference, detachment to the world, that he was very self-sufficient, right? Very strong within his own self and his own connection, right? And so he was immediately attracted to him, and he began hearing, right? Listening regularly, going. And as I said, right, he always had he always listened with such deep attention. And this was to the point where some members of the Gaudiya Mat, they started to suspect that he was a spy, because he would come in and he wouldn't ask questions. He was just like really deeply trying to absorb everything. And at one point, one of the brahmacharis, Kirtanananda, they thought he was like, because remember, as I said, it's a very tumultuous time in India, and they thought he was a spy from the British government. And so there was this one brahmachari, Kirtanananda. One day he like kind of kicked him out. Srila Śrīdhar was just going to walk upstairs to try and have darshan of Saraswati Thakur, and this one brahmachari stopped and said, "You can't just walk up. You have to first ask for permission. Then you can be taken up. And Srila Śrīdhar was quite hurt by that. Of course, he's just there to listen, right, in a serious way. But then so he went out at that time. But then he thought to himself, if there's something valuable here, then even if they beat me with broomsticks, then I should still come. Doesn't matter whether I'm being given respect. And he said, and if there's something of no value here, but they're putting me on a throne, I should not come, right? This was Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj's nature, and so he thought, then I must continue, right? It doesn't matter. There was, at that time when Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj joined, it was also at a time when the Gaudiya Mat was still small, later on it became this very grand institution. But at that time, it was a small group around Saraswati Thakur. And there was another comment Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj made, saying, I did not join for any, big building or, expert organization or anything like that, but I came because of the substance that I heard from my Guru Mahārāj. It was purely for the substance. He could see and perceive and feel that what Saraswati Thakur was holding was something very profound. And so then Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, for about 1 year, he was associating with the Gaudiya Mat, still, hesitating a little for different reasons to take initiation. But then he tells of how he finally made the decision to like officially join and take initiation, that there was a Gaur Purnima celebration, around 1 week celebration in Mayapur, and he joined that. And then at the conclusion of this 7-day festival, everyone's like leaving, and Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, he observed how, right, on this last day, then Saraswati Thakur was seated in one place, and everyone's going to him, giving their pranam, and then leaving. And from a distance, Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj heard Saraswati Thakur telling them, "Don't cheat me, don't cheat me." And Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj was very surprised. He wasn't expecting that. And he thought, everyone came for the festival. Now it's the conclusion of the festival. Everyone's leaving. Where's the question of cheating? And so he went closer to listen, hear better. And he heard Saraswati Thakur saying, you all came here and made a promise that you would serve Krishna. And now you are leaving. Right? And you will forget about that promise. And he said, and you may tell me, there's a fire going on in my home. I'll just go put it out and I'll come back. But I will say to you, even if the whole world is on fire, all of your needs will be met, in service to Krishna. Nothing is more important than this. Nothing is more urgent than this Krishnanushilana, right? This search for Sri Krishna, service to Sri Krishna. There was another expression we hear Saraswati Thakur say, Krishna Santosh, right? Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj said that Krishna Santosh, it means the satisfaction of Krishna. And there's one place, I don't remember if Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj or Saraswati Thakur, but it's something like, this is our war cry. This is our war cry. This is our slogan. For the satisfaction of Krishna, right? This is everything. This is the only worthy pursuit and endeavor in this world, right? And so anyhow, Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj wonderstruck. And Srila Saraswati Thakur is not just speaking these words, but he's also speaking with so much energy, right? So much potency, right? So much depth of heart. And all of it doesn't matter if the whole world is on fire, all your needs will be met by only this one endeavor, right? Search for Krishna, service to Sri Krishna. And so when Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj heard that, his heart was completely captured, and all of his doubts left, and he thought, oh, I must thrust my head here, right? I won't find anywhere in the world this type of earnestness for the service of Krishna. And so then at that point, he committed himself fully, right? He took initiation, he joined the Mat, and began his life of active missionary service. And ultimately, he became recognized as a very great preacher. He, as I said, right, he had this profound ability to grasp, right, and hearing. And Saraswati Thakur, I'm sure some of you have read some of his writing, because he wrote in English too, some of his writings, and very difficult English, very difficult English, Saraswati Thakur, highly sophisticated English, that it's difficult for an Englishman to follow without a dictionary, right? And if you want an example, if you haven't seen, in the ISKCON edition to Brahma Samhita, there's an introduction or foreword from Saraswati Thakur. It's wonderful, but difficult to follow. Our Gurudev actually liked that so much, and I heard he requested it to be included in our edition of Brahma Samhita, but somehow or other got left out. But anyhow, so so most of the disciples of Saraswati Thakur, they would struggle with comprehending his talks. Of course, he would be generally speaking in Bengali. But they would struggle with because he's speaking at such a high, sophisticated level, right? And so we hear that after his talks, many of them would gather around Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj. And the other person who was very expert at understanding him was Ananta Vasudev, right? He was one of the very prominent members. Ananta Vasudev, and then the other one was Kunja Babu. They were like the two most prominent members of the Gaudiya Math. And Kunja Babu, he was like the big manager, very, very practical, very capable. And then Ananta Vasudev was famous for his brilliance and comprehension of the Siddhanta, of the teachings. And naturally, Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj and Ananta Vasudev were very good friends, right? Because they're both, have this deep understanding of the Siddhanta. But we hear that, sometimes after the talks of Saraswati Thakur, then godbrothers would gather around Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj. What did our Guru Maharaj just say? And Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj would help them to understand. Swami Maharaj Prabhupada himself, he mentioned very humbly and sweetly, he said, I did not always understand my Guru Maharaj, he said, but I always continued hearing. I always continued listening, right? But one thing about Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, we heard Gurudev tell, was that his nature, he wasn't just a great scholar, but he had a very deep, genuine Vaishnava nature. And he had this simplicity, even sometimes a childlikeness to him. And even to the point, we heard from Srila Govinda Maharaj, that Ananta Vasudev, right? The other person I mentioned who was also very brilliant, he sometimes would become a little irritated because even though Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj was so qualified, he was also very open in his nature and simple, and he would mix with everyone in the mat. He didn't like keep any airs about him, and he could be very friendly to the newcomers, right, who don't know anything. And we hear Nanta Vasudev would sometimes be irritated by that, would say, why are you, you're my friends, you're my friend. Why are you hanging out with these people? You're my friend. We're on a different level. Um, but yeah, so Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj didn't have any, pride about this, and we hear too, like in his Gurudev also mentioned an example in his, like many years later, like when he started Chaitanya Saraswat Math, he he's doing everything in the mat himself in those earlier years, and he told this story how once Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, he was fixing the fence around the mat, something like that. And his clothing's a little scruffy, right? His sannyas vesh, and he didn't have that upper cloth, the uttariya, on him. And he's there like hammering or something on the fence. And there were some visitors who came to the mat. They're looking for Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj. They say, oh, is this Śrīdhar Maharaj's mat? We're looking for Śrīdhar Maharaj. And Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, they're speaking to him. He's, oh, you want to talk to Śrīdhar Maharaj? Yes, we want to talk to Śrīdhar Maharaj. So then Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj went into his room and like straightened out his cloth a little bit. He put on his uttariya, tidied up. Then he came out again. I am Śrīdhar Maharaj, like very unassuming, unassuming nature. But anyhow, so fairly quickly after joining, other members of the mat, they realized how qualified he was, and he received sannyas within a few years, and he became one of the leading preachers. He traveled all over India, actually. He, for the cause of seva, the Vaishnavas can do anything, right? And we tend to think of Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj more as like being, as he showed himself in his later years, right, as being more reserved and not inclined to preach and so on. But in his earlier days, he preached widely and traveled widely all over India. And Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, he always had this very special ability to be able to present Krishna consciousness in such a way that the particular nature of his audience could grasp it. He could read people, right? And even to the point, we hear one occasion when Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur himself, he was struggling to convey some point to one visitor, and they're debating on some particular point, and Saraswati Thakur is getting frustrated because this other person's not understanding him. And so finally he called for Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj that you please talk to him, you please explain to him. And within 20 minutes, Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj was able to conquer that person, and they happily accepted. This was another quality of Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj that Gurudev mentioned, that when he defeated people, which he always did in debate, he would do so in such a way that they were happy to be defeated by him, because he was such a gentleman, and he was so humble and respectful in his nature. One other interesting thing Gurudev mentioned was, because Saraswati Thakur, he had a strong nature, clear, strong style, right? We hear of one occasion when Saraswati Thakur, he had this kind of like Muhammad Ali approach, like Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj compared him to Muhammad Ali, who would say, or was it Mike Tyson, who said, I am the greatest? Muhammad Ali, the Dandakaranya is also here, the other side of the room. The sun shining, yeah, he's glowing. Who was it, sorry? Was Muhammad Ali, the boxer, right? Yeah, he would say, I am the greatest, right? And so Srila Śrīdhar said Saraswati Thakur also had this style, right? But not for about himself, but his gurus, right? That what my gurus are giving is the greatest, right? And there was this one challenge he issued once. He was speaking like in a big public area, like, I challenge anyone. I can defeat anyone. I will prove to anyone that what Mahaprabhu has given, what our gurus have given, this is the highest, right? This was his nature, right? And we hear from Bhakti Dev-Goswāmī Mahārāj, right, when he published the first book, Search for Shri Krishna, Reality the Beautiful, he put that one caption under Śrīla Mahārāj's, sorry, under Saraswati Thakur's picture, that he declared totalitarian war against all of Maya and even all existing conceptions, all other existing conceptions of religion, right? And we hear that Goswami Maharaj put this, but he wasn't feeling 100% sure about whether it was the right thing. But he said when he showed it to Srila Śrīla was so pleased. And he said, if you didn't say anything else about him, this would be enough. You know, this is complete, right? So this was Saraswati Thakur's style. And Gurudev mentioned that many of the disciples of Saraswati Thakur, they kind of like took the same approach. Gurudev used this word like hammering, like very strong hammering style. And he said, but Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, he had his own style, more gentle, you know, more polite, more respectful. That was his own Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj's style. And because of that, you know, people were happy to be defeated by him, right? And so we heard Gurudev tell many different stories, actually. You know, one story is very nice. And you know, sometimes God brothers of Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, they would call for him, like if they were having trouble to establish their mission. Because you know, India has this ancient tradition of debate. And so to be able to like honorably, authentically, and scripturally establish your point and your message, this is very important, right, in the Indian tradition. And if you can't do that, then you're out. You know, nobody's going to listen to you. And so we hear different occasions when his godbrothers would call for him, like they're having trouble to establish their mission, and local pundits, the scholars, are, you know, making trouble and opposing. And they would call sometimes for Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, you please come and help us, right? And he had this type of ability. One very nice story we heard from Gurudev was when Gurudev had started doing these tours, right? Gurudev started these pilgrimage tours around India. And Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj went on a few occasions. And there was one occasion when he went, that they went to Badarik Ashram, right, in the Himalayas. And that time, and Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj came, and there were a couple other godbrothers of Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, so also senior Vaishnavas who were part of this group. And then there was the general party. And there was this one occasion, Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, they were in Badarik Ashram. Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj developed a very high fever, and he was in his bed, you know, for some days. And there was one pundit who came, and he'd heard about Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, and he wanted to question him and debate with him. But he found where they were, their residence, where they were staying, and he came, and they told him, oh, Śrīdhar Maharaj is really not well, you know, he's in his room, we're sorry, you know, you can't meet with him. But if you like, you can speak with us, you know, there were like 2 or 3 other godbrothers there, and so they were having some discussion for some time. And it was one verse in particular his point of debate, his question was, what is the proof that the Atma exists, right? What is the actual proof that spirit exists? And so they were having some discussion, and these Vaishnavas are presenting so many points and quoting so many verses, but this one pundit, this scholar, he was not satisfied at all. They could not convince him. And meanwhile, Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj is in the next room. He's hearing everything, right? But he's in bed, you know, very sick. But he's hearing and seeing, oh, I have to step in, right? And so Gurudev, he told the story how he like sat up in his bed and he called out, like in the, very weak voice, like, bring him here, bring him here. So they brought him into Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj's room. And within like 15 or 20 minutes, Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj satisfied him. And Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj quoted this one verse from Bhagavatam, which I cannot remember at this moment. But the verse is saying that some people say the Atma exists, some people say it doesn't exist. And this is the essence of the verse. But this debate, there's no end to this debate. This debate will continue eternally, because those who have the eyes to see, they can see. Those who don't have the eyes to see, they cannot see. Right? And that so Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj explained this verse to him, and that Pandit, his heart was happily conquered by that. He could accept this, and he told Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, I know that verse. He was a very learned scholar, right? He said, I know that verse very well, but hearing it from you, right, and seeing, right, your spiritual potency in explaining it, he said, this has touched me, right? So this is another thing too, right? That Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj was not just a scholar; he was a Vaishnava, and he had this, this deep potency, right, to move people. We heard another story from Gurudev. Some of you probably know this story. This was also in later years, in the time of Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Mat, and we hear. I think it was that same story I mentioned earlier when those visitors came to meet Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, and Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj is fixing the fence. I think it was those same people. And it was one woman and her father-in-law, I believe, and they were coming because her husband and her father-in-law's son, they were coming on behalf of the husband and son, right, who he had become a drunkard, and womanizer and all these things. He'd fallen into he came from a good family, but had fallen into very bad habits, and they're very concerned about him. And they'd heard about Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj and how great he was. And so they came and sought him out at his mat. And then they went and told him, oh, please help us. Our relative, he's fallen into this very low behavior. Please, you try to preach to him. And so Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj said, okay, if you bring him to me, I'll try, And so they went back home, and then they made some pretext, right? And they told this man, oh, let's go for a walk on the Ganges. And that time, it's still close to the Ganges, but that time, because the Ganga's always moving, right? Our mat was very close, like almost right on the bank of the Ganges. So they took their relative for a walk by the Ganges, and then they passed by our mat, Sri Chaitanya Saraswati mat. Oh, we've heard, there's a great sadhu who lives here. Let's just stop by and, visit. And so they took him in. He's like, okay, sure. They put him in front of Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj. And Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, he explains this one verse from Bhagavatam, Labdva sudorlabam adorlabam, Labdva sudorlabam, begins like that, saying, having attained this very rare human birth, then one should use it to endeavor for their highest welfare, right? And even in animal life, we can engage in sense pleasure. But this human birth, this is our opportunity, right, to attain the highest thing. Verses like this. And Srila Śrīdhar, it was only like 20 minutes or something. Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj explained this verse to him, but with such potency, right? Such spiritual power. And that man was so deeply moved, right? And he threw himself at Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj's feet, and he, ended up taking initiation. And then we hear some days later, very funny story, that the barber, that man's barber who used to cut his hair, came and found Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, and he said, oh, what a great soul you are. You know, this man, I saw what he was like before. And now I see him, you know, shaved head, chanting on his mala, you know, very clean, you know, very, very, very nice, good nature, you know. And he said, you know, we've heard of such things in the time of Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu, Jagai and Madai and so on. But now I'm seeing with my own eyes, I'm witnessing with my own eyes, you know, that by your grace, such miracles are still possible, right? And so that, you know, this was the type of power. In 20 minutes, Śrīla Maharaj could move this man's heart, right? To make a wholesale transformation in his life, right? This was Śrīdhar Maharaj. And so, you know, going back to Śrīla Maharaj's earlier years in the Gaudiya Math, you know, we hear at one point he thought to him, you know, he had this deep love for his guru, Saraswati Thakur, but, you know, it's growing into a big mission. So many new members are joining. And Śrīla Maharaj is thinking, like, how can I really capture his attention? And he thought to himself, if I really want to like gain his favor, he said, I have to touch his heart. I have to find some way to really touch his heart. And he thought about this. And so then what he did is he had this strategy that he thought, you know, what is most dear to my Guru Maharaj? He thought most dear to him is his Guru, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He thought, you know, if I go to glorify himself, you know, himself, yeah, that would please him to some degree, but that's not what's really deep in his heart. What's really in his heart is his own Guru. So he adopted this like indirect strategy. He thought, I will praise who is most beloved to him. And in that way, you know, I will please him. And so at that time, Śrīla Maharaj made this composition, which many of you will know, of course. It's published in the back of Prapana Jivanamritam, also in some editions of our Kirtan guide, Bhakti Vinod Viraha Dashakam. Their prayers in separation from Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Very extraordinary composition, Sanskrit composition, 10 verses. And in those verses, Śrīla Maharaj is like, you know, describing in a very broad way, you know, what was the atmosphere in which Bhaktivinoda Thakur came to present this pure conception of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Also, explaining the rarity and the preciousness of the gift that he gave, and comparing with previous acharyas, right? So many great acharyas have come and spread Vaishnavism, but highlighting the unique nature of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's gift, giving this gift of entrance to Radha, Krishna, Leela, Vrindavan, and ultimately Radha Dasyam, the service of Srimati Radharani as the highest attainment. And extraordinary composition. And one verse in particular is very extraordinary, where Śrīla Maharaj is, you know, this, you know, as I was saying in the beginning, this is unique wealth that has come from the heart of Śrīla Bhakti Rakṣak Śrīdhar Dev-Goswāmī Maharaj. You know, we are so privileged. This is, you know, this is something that, you know, persons of the highest caliber, you know, they will be impressed, you know, they will be, you know, fulfilled with so much joy and appreciation to be able to read these things and hear such things, right? And so there's this one particular, the whole composition is so wonderful, but there's this one in particular, it's the 8th or 9th verse. Shri Gauranumatam Sarupa Viditam Rupa Grajainadritam Rupa Jai Pariveshitam Raguganer Aswaditam Sevitam Shuka Shiva Brahmadi Samanitam Shiradha Pada Sevanamritam Mahot Tadatam Ishobhavam, where he's saying, it's really extraordinary verse that Śrīla Maharaj is outlining what is the specific contribution of each of the great acharyas in the line of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And what is the gift that Mahaprabhu came to give? That is ultimately the service of Srimati Radharani, right? And Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj's Radha Dasyam. And so in this composition, Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj is identifying, what was the unique role that all of our acharyas had from the time of Mahaprabhu up to the present in distributing that gift, right? That this, what Shri Gauranumatam, what Mahaprabhu came to give, Swarupa Viditam, what Swarup Damodar, what was known to Swarup Damodar, right? Appreciated so deeply by Swarup Damodar, what was adored by Sanatana Goswami, what was distributed by Rupa Goswami, what was, Jiva, I missed that line, Jiva Dyer Abhirakshitam, that what was protected by Jiva Goswami, what was tasted and enhanced by Raghunath Goswami, what was respected from afar by Brahma, Shiva, Shuka, then Shirādha Parasevanamrita Mahota Datam Isho Bhavan. Then finally, the conclusion of the verse, Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj is saying that you, Bhakti Vinod, you can give that gift, right? How high is your position that you can give this great gift, right? That this is like this precious bunch of jewels, this precious treasure that's been handed from one acharya to another. They all have their unique role in presenting this to the world and protecting this and so on. And you, Bhakti Vinod, you can give this. What is your position? And Saraswati Thakur was so pleased, was so supremely happy to read this verse. And we heard Gurudev mention how, like, he heard description from Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, when Saraswati Thakur was reading through these verses, how he's commenting and responding to each verse. And that verse particularly, Saraswati Thakur was so pleased with. And when he finished reading that, he made a comment that when I leave this world, I'm satisfied that at least one man will remain behind who understands what I came to give, right? Who understands what my purpose was, right? He made this comment. And then, then some years later, when Saraswati Thakur left the world, right, we hear how he specifically called for Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj. Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj had been on duty, right, with Saraswati, because they would all take turns throughout the night. Saraswati Thakur was never left alone in that last period. And Śrīdhar Maharaj just had his duty at the most difficult time, like 2 to 4 a.m., something like that. He'd gone to his room to rest. Saraswati Thakur specifically called for him and requested him to sing Shri Rupa Manjari Pada, right? This is the great anthem of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, expressing the highest ideal of our line, the service of Shri Rupa. And so Saraswati Thakur specifically called for Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj to come and asked him to sing that song, right? And then we hear Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj so humble, he's hesitating. Another Vaishnava requested someone else to sing it, but Saraswati Thakur stops them. No, I want to hear Śrīdhar Maharaj sing this song. But Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, and at that time, right, everyone present, they could recognize, there's some transmission taking place, right? Mystic power transmission. Someone present used that expression. They could understand. And Gurudev said many of them were shocked. They weren't expecting that because it was so clear. Saraswati Thakur didn't leave any clear like will or instructions for how they should continue the mission. But by that transaction, they could recognize, Srila Saraswati Thakur is giving a clear indication how his lineage will continue. But Srila Śrīdhar Maharaj, he made this one comment that he said, I believe it is on the basis of that one verse that I wrote in those years before. It is on the basis of that my Guru Maharaj asked me to sing that song at that time, right? So that's how much Saraswati Thakur appreciated that composition. And we also hear, just to finish that point, that when Saraswati Thakur was reading through those verses in that first time, at the very end of the composition, then Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj, he says, I have one request of you. Because this composition, Bhakti Vinod Viraha Dashakam, it's a direct address to Bhakti Vinod Thakur. He's directly addressing Bhakti Vinod Thakur. And then at the end, it's like a very funny dynamic, right? That Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj wrote this. It's a direct address to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but he's giving it to Saraswati Thakur. So then Saraswati Thakur is like reading this prayer that Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj has made to his guru, right? That Śrīla Saraswati Thakur's disciple has made a prayer to his guru, and he's being offered that. It's a very like funny kind of exchange. And so this, it's a directly, it begins, ha ha Thakur Bhakti Vinod, like, oh Bhakti Vinod. He's directly speaking to Bhakti Vinod Thakur. And then at the conclusion of this composition, Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj, he says, oh, great soul, my Param Guru, I just have one request of you, right? And we hear that Saraswati Thakur, when he read that line, he kind of like had some question, like, because normally the pure Vaishnava mood is you don't ask for anything for yourself. And then Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj said, I ask for one benediction from you. And Saraswati Thakur was like kind of questioning, like, he's going to spoil it now. He wrote such a nice composition. Now he's going to spoil it. And but then he went to read, what he wrote as his request. And he said, my only request of you is that you grant me admission into the service group of your most beloved, right? Meaning, like, give me the service of your beloved disciple, Saraswati Thakur. So very, very, very sweet offering, right? Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj is asking Bhakti Vinod Thakur in front of Saraswati Thakur for the service of Saraswati Thakur. And so, of course, Śrīla Saraswati Thakur was very touched by that. He was very pleased by that. And of course, ultimately, in that composition, he was successful in his original intention, right, to capture the heart of Saraswati Thakur. And there were so many other comments that Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj made. But that verse and that composition in particular, have such an important position for all Gaudiya Vaishnavas, right? And really highlights what is the position of Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj, right, in his understanding and presentation of this very high Siddhanta. How are we doing for time? We're just about at 1 hour. Well, let's see. We've had a few others join our online Sangha. Chaitanya Mai, Devi Dasi's joined us, and Dhananjaya Prabhu also. Nazar, very happy you can all be with us on this special day. And we all have a duty, right, as the grand disciples and great grand disciples of Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj, to try to, as we said in the beginning, right, to understand, what was Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj's, what were his ideals, what was his nature. But he's the founder of this mission, right? If we want to try to consider ourselves aspiring members of this mission, we want to try to develop our understanding, right, of who he was, what was his purpose, what was his nature, what was his contribution. We've only skimmed the surface actually today. There's so much more that he gave, right? He gave, famously, right, Gayatri Mantra explanation, revealed what had not been clearly revealed before, explanation of Chatur Shloki and Gita and other verses in Bhagavad Gita, very profound explanation which had not been given before, and as we said earlier, right, these are things which were appreciated by other very great Vaishnavas, right? And of course, Prapana Jivanamrita, this is also on the list of unique wealth of Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj, that we cannot estimate actually how privileged we are, right? But we hear that one godbrother of Śrīla Śrīdhar Mahārāj, when Prapana Jivanamrita was published, which, by the way, Srila Swami Maharaj Prabhupada, he requested his sister Swami Maharaj Prabhupada's sister was very appreciative of Srila Śrīla Maharaj, had wanted to take initiation from him actually, but at that time Srila Śrīla Maharaj wasn't accepting disciples and sent her to Bhakti Saranga Goswami Maharaj, right, who we mentioned earlier. But it was she who sponsored the first printing of Prapana Jivanamrita. And but also when it first came out, we hear that one of the, was it Keshav Maharaj? It was one, or I don't remember, maybe Tirtha Maharaj. One godbrother, Srila Śrīla Maharaj, he had a daily practice of reading one chapter of Bhagavad Gita. But when Prapana Jivanamrita came out, he changed, so he was reading one chapter of Prapana Jivanamrita every day. And this book, we can also remember that Srila Śrīla Maharaj, he was working on this book at the time when he first established Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Math. So, he established, what is Prapana Jivanamrita? It is exploring the depths of Sharanagati, surrender. And so it was on these principles we can also say that this Math was founded. It is our Math book, right? You could say, it represents all of the ideals of Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Math. So this is very important book for us. He also mentioned, like after his Guru Maharaj's mission kind of disintegrated, right? After Saraswati Thakur left the world, things kind of started to break apart. And Srila Śrīla Maharaj, he wasn't identifying with all these different groups and just wanted really to be alone and study the scriptures and cultivate the wealth that he'd received from his guru. But he also described, there's a chapter in I think it's Sermons of the Gardening of Devotion, Volume 3. There's a chapter where Srila Śrīla Maharaj is speaking about how he came to write Prapana Jivanamrita. And he says also he was feeling this kind of helplessness within himself. And he thought, I'm in this position now, like I don't know, where to go, what to do. And he said, but Sharanagati will come to my relief, right? Surrender will come to my relief. And so that was part of his inspiration in compiling Prapana Jivanamrita. And he also expressed that as this is helping me, may it also help others in the future who find themselves in a similar position. So we can also remember the importance of that book on this day. Well, maybe we'll stop there for today. I know it's very late for some of you, and others are probably getting ready to go to work. Thank you all so much for joining. Does anyone else want to share anything related to today? We have also others in the room here.
Thank you very much, Vishakha-ji. That was wonderful.
Oh, Ramananda
Thank you so much.
Prabhu, Dhandavad. Thank you for joining.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, maybe we'll stop there. Jai Śrīla Bhakti Rakṣak Śrīdhar Dev-Goswāmī Maharaj ki Jai. Tadi Shubha Avirbhav Mahamahotsavatiti ki Jai. Jai Śrīla Bhakti Sundar Govinda Dev-Goswāmī Maharaj ki Jai. Very happy to have you with us, Chaitanya Mai. Wishing you all a good night, a good day ahead, and we'll be in touch. We'll be connected. Jai Shri Shri Guru Gauranga.
Dhanavad Pranam.
Did that go right? Yeah, I think so, yeah. Dandakarnipu is marking the conclusion of our meeting. Haribol, see you all next time.